Guterres told member states that they meet at a time of turbulence globally, from wars that trample on international law to an information war online, a war on the poor and a war on nature, collectively amounting to a war on fundamental human rights.
Our world is becoming less safe by the day. After decades of stable power relations, we are transitioning into an era of multipolarity. And this creates new opportunities for leadership and justice on the international stage. But multipolarity without strong multilateral institutions is a recipe for chaos. As powers compete, tensions rise. The rule of law and rules of war are being undermined. From Ukraine to Sudan, to Myanmar, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Gaza, parties to conflict are turning a blind eye to international law, the Geneva Conventions and even the United Nations Charter.
He lamented the Security Council's inability to agree on how to resolve different conflicts, pointing specifically to the lack of unity on key files on its agenda, most notably in recent years, Ukraine and Gaza.
The Security Council is often deadlocked, unable to act on the most significant peace and security issues of our time. The Council's lack of unity on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and on Israel's military operations in Gaza following the horrific terror attacks by Hamas on 7 October has severely, perhaps fatally, undermined its authority. The Council needs serious reform to its composition and working methods.
He further warned that the flouting of international law only feeds insecurity and results in more bloodshed.
Human rights conventions and humanitarian law are based on cold, hard reality. They recognize that terrorizing civilians and depriving them of food, water and health care is a recipe for endless anger, alienation, extremism and conflict. Today's warmongers cannot erase the clear lesson of the past. Protecting human rights protects us all. We urgently need a new commitment to all human rights, civil, cultural, economic, political and social, as they apply to peace and security, backed by serious efforts at implementation and accountability.
Guterres also pointed to the Summit of the Future in September and the UN's new agenda for peace as key opportunities for countries to recommit to working for peace and security rooted in human rights.
It calls for all military engagement to respect human rights and humanitarian law and to be backed by political and development strategies. It urges security policies centred on people with the full and equal participation of women and the strong representation of young people. It calls for human rights to be at the heart of the governance of new weapons technologies, including artificial intelligence, and seeks the total prohibition of lethal autonomous weapons with the power to kill without human involvement. It affirms that human rights and humanitarian law apply in cyberspace, and it calls for much closer cooperation between the UN's human rights frameworks, the Security Council and the Peacebuilding Commission to address violations and put human rights at the core of peace operations.
He also argued that war was not only waged on the battlefield.
The UN chief acknowledged that developing economies were still struggling from the double shock of the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine in a world where the Sustainable Development Goals, from ending poverty to food security and gender equality, were very far off track. He also argued for reshaping the global financial architecture to better address the massive debt burden faced by the world's poorest countries that now jeopardizes their ability to meet the various goals and rights enshrined in the 2030 Development Agenda. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.